You know, there's something about Hollywood that we don't often talk about. We see the glitz, the glamour, the red carpets, and the million-dollar smiles, but behind those perfectly rehearsed interviews and carefully crafted public personas, there exists a darker reality that most people choose to ignore. Sam Elliott, the legendary actor with that iconic mustache and gravelly voice that could make reading a phone book sound like poetry, recently broke his silence about something that's been eating at him for decades. In a rare moment of brutal honesty, he revealed the names of 6 actors who, according to his decades of experience in the industry, represent some of the most troubling behavior Hollywood has to offer. Now, before we dive into this explosive revelation, let me tell you something that's going to shock you even more than the names themselves. Elliott didn't just throw these names out casually over a beer. This is a man who spent over 50 years in Hollywood, who's worked alongside legends, who's seen empires rise and fall, and who's maintained a reputation for being one of the most genuine, down-to-earth people in an industry famous for its fakeness. When a man like Sam Elliott speaks, especially about something this serious, you better believe there's weight behind every single word. The first name that Elliott mentioned sent shockwaves through the entertainment community, and honestly, it shouldn't have surprised anyone who's been paying attention. We're talking about an actor who's built an entire career on playing heroes, on embodying the American ideal, on making audiences believe in redemption and second chances. But according to Elliott, the reality behind the scenes tells a completely different story. This actor, whose name has become synonymous with blockbuster success, allegedly has a pattern of behavior that would make your skin crawl. We're talking about someone who treats crew members like they're completely disposable, who's thrown legendary tantrums on set that have reduced grown professionals to tears, and who allegedly has a documented history of making life absolutely miserable for anyone he perceives as beneath him in the Hollywood hierarchy. Elliott spoke about witnessing this behavior firsthand on a project they worked on together years ago, describing an incident where this actor verbally destroyed a young production assistant for something as minor as bringing him the wrong brand of bottled water. But it wasn't just the explosion of anger that disturbed Elliott. It was the calculated cruelty, the way this actor seemed to take genuine pleasure in humiliating someone who had no power to fight back. Elliott described watching this young person, who had probably dreamed their entire life of working in movies, standing there with tears streaming down their face while this supposed hero berated them with language so vile that even the hardened crew members looked away in disgust. But here's where it gets even darker, and this is something that Elliott emphasized repeatedly in his revelation. This actor's behavior isn't just about having a bad temper or being demanding. According to multiple sources that Elliott has spoken with over the years, there's a pattern of psychological manipulation that borders on sociopathic. This actor allegedly keeps detailed mental notes on everyone around him, cataloging their weaknesses, their insecurities, their vulnerabilities, and then uses that information as weapons when it serves his purposes. Former co-stars have described working with him as walking through a minefield, never knowing when an innocent comment or action might trigger a calculated campaign to undermine your confidence or damage your reputation. Elliott spoke about how this actor has allegedly torpedoed careers simply because someone had the audacity to receive good reviews for their performance when working alongside him. We're talking about phone calls made to producers, subtle comments dropped in the right ears, whisper campaigns that start small but grow until suddenly that promising young actor finds themselves unable to get work, wondering what the hell happened to their career. And the most chilling part? This actor does it all while maintaining that perfect public image, that charming smile in interviews, those carefully rehearsed stories about method acting and dedication to craft. He's created a persona so convincing that when victims try to speak out, they're dismissed as jealous or difficult. Elliott said watching this manipulation play out over the years, seeing talented people destroyed while this actor collects awards and accolades, has been one of the most frustrating experiences of his career. The second name Elliott revealed is someone who's built an entire brand around being edgy, controversial, and unapologetically himself. This actor loves to position himself as the rebel, the truth teller, the guy who doesn't play by Hollywood's rules. But according to Elliott, that carefully cultivated image is nothing more than a smokescreen for behavior that crosses every ethical line imaginable. We're talking about an actor whose alleged treatment of women on set has been an open secret in Hollywood for years, yet somehow he continues to get work, continues to be celebrated as this iconoclastic genius who's just too brilliant and complicated for conventional morality to apply to him. Elliott described sitting in meetings where producers would joke about this actor's behavior, where they'd laugh about his eccentric treatment of female co-stars, as if systematic harassment and intimidation was just part of his creative process that everyone should tolerate because he's so talented. The stories Elliott has heard over the years paint a picture of someone who views every woman on set as either a potential conquest or an obstacle to be removed, with no middle ground for basic professional respect. What makes this actor's behavior particularly insidious, according to Elliott, is how he's weaponized the language of artistic integrity to justify his actions. When female actors complain about his inappropriate behavior, he frames it as them not being committed enough to the craft, not being willing to go to the uncomfortable places that great art requires. He's created this narrative where rejecting his advances or refusing to participate in unnecessarily intimate scenes that weren't in the script becomes evidence of professional weakness rather than reasonable boundary setting. Elliott talked about hearing from multiple actresses who've worked with this actor, describing how he'd change scripts at the last minute to add intimate scenes, how he'd insist on numerous takes of physical moments while the cameras weren't even rolling, how he'd make comments about their bodies disguised as directorial notes or character analysis. And if anyone pushed back, he'd launch into these long monologues about art and vulnerability and how real actors have to be willing to make themselves completely available to the work. It's a manipulation tactic that Elliott described as genuinely evil because it takes something pure, the desire to create meaningful art, and twists it into a weapon for exploitation. But what really gets Elliott's blood boiling about this particular actor is how the industry has enabled him. Despite numerous complaints, despite settlements paid out, despite the whispers that everyone in Hollywood knows about, this actor continues to be offered prestigious projects. He's still treated as an artistic treasure rather than the predator that Elliott believes him to be. Elliott spoke about watching award shows where this actor receives standing ovations, where other actors praise his courage and his commitment to pushing boundaries, and feeling physically ill knowing what that praise is really celebrating. He described it as a collective delusion, where everyone in the industry has agreed to pretend that artistic brilliance somehow excuses or even requires abusive behavior. And it's not just about protecting one actor. It's about maintaining a system where power can be abused without consequences as long as you're successful enough, as long as you make enough money for the studios, as long as you win enough awards to bring prestige to the projects you work on. The third name on Elliott's list is someone who might surprise you, primarily because this actor has spent years carefully constructing an image of being the nicest guy in Hollywood. We're talking about someone who's famous for his charity work, his humble interviews, his stories about staying grounded despite massive success. This is an actor who's built an entire secondary career on being relatable and down-to-earth, someone who regular people feel like they could actually be friends with. But according to Elliott, that public persona is one of the most calculated and cynical constructions he's ever witnessed in Hollywood. Behind closed doors, this actor is allegedly someone completely different. Someone whose niceness evaporates the moment the cameras stop rolling or the moment he's dealing with people who can't do anything for his career. Elliott described hearing story after story from below-the-line workers, the people who actually make movies happen but whose names you never see in headlines, about how this actor treats them with contempt when he thinks no one important is watching. What Elliott finds particularly disturbing about this actor isn't just the two-faced nature of his behavior, though that's certainly troubling enough. It's the premeditated nature of his public image cultivation. Elliott talked about watching this actor work a room at industry events, seeing how he carefully calculates every interaction based on what that person can do for him. He'll spend 20 minutes being charming and attentive to a director or producer who might cast him, making them feel like they're the most important person in the world, creating these seemingly genuine connections that people walk away from thinking they've made a real friend. But then, the moment that person is no longer useful to his career, it's like a switch flips. Phone calls don't get returned, assistants suddenly can't find time in his schedule, and if you happen to run into him at an event, you get a distracted greeting before he moves on to someone more valuable. Elliott said he's watched this pattern repeat itself dozens of times over the years, watched people who thought they had a genuine relationship with this actor slowly realize they were just being used as props in his carefully managed career. But what elevates this actor to Elliott's list of the most evil in Hollywood is what he allegedly does to maintain his nice guy image when people start to catch on to his real nature. According to Elliott, This actor has a team of publicists and managers who specialize in preemptive reputation management. If someone threatens to speak publicly about his real behavior, they launch into action with a playbook that's apparently been refined over years. They'll dig into that person's background, looking for anything that can be used to discredit them. They'll plant stories suggesting that person is difficult to work with or has professional problems. They'll make sure that person understands, without anyone explicitly making threats, that speaking out about this actor's behavior will be the end of their career in Hollywood. Elliott described it as a protection racket disguised as public relations, a systematic operation to ensure that the carefully crafted image never gets tarnished by reality. And the most evil part. This actor donates millions to charity, does humanitarian work that genuinely helps people, and uses those good deeds as both a shield against criticism and as evidence that anyone who says negative things about him must be lying. He's created a situation where his public good deeds serve as permission to be privately terrible, where the calculation isn't just about image management but about building insurance against accountability. The fourth actor Elliott named is someone who's known for playing intense, complicated characters, someone who's won virtually every award the industry can give, someone who's considered by many critics to be one of the greatest actors of his generation. And Elliott doesn't dispute the talent. He said watching this actor work is genuinely awe-inspiring, that the man has abilities that come along maybe once in a generation. But according to Elliott, that immense talent comes packaged with a personality so toxic, so destructive, so completely devoid of empathy for the people around him, that it raises serious questions about whether genius excuses cruelty. This actor is apparently famous in Hollywood circles for his preparation process, which sounds admirable until you understand what that actually means for everyone else working on a project. We're talking about someone who will demand that entire productions revolve around his process, who insists that other actors stay in character even when cameras aren't rolling if that's what he needs for his performance, who has allegedly caused productions to go wildly over budget because his method requires multiple takes that serve his process but contribute nothing to the final film. Elliott talked about speaking with directors who've worked with this actor, and the picture that emerges is of someone who holds entire productions hostage to his artistic vision. If a director tries to suggest a different approach to a scene, this actor will allegedly launch into hours-long discussions about character motivation and emotional truth, effectively shutting down filming until he gets his way. If other actors aren't performing in a way that he feels serves his performance, he'll work behind the scenes to get them replaced or to have their roles reduced. Elliott described one particularly egregious incident he heard about where this actor allegedly convinced a director to cut most of another actor's role because he felt their performance was pulling focus from his character, destroying what had been a breakthrough opportunity for a younger performer. And when that younger actor tried to push back, to fight for the role they'd prepared for and signed on to play, this actor allegedly made their life so miserable on set that they eventually quit the production entirely, with their exit framed as them being unprofessional and unable to handle the demands of working with serious artists. What makes this actor's behavior particularly evil in Elliott's estimation is the way the industry celebrates it. His demanding nature gets framed as dedication. His treatment of other actors gets described as pushing them to be better. His budget-busting methods get romanticized as the price of artistic excellence. Elliott said he's sat through countless interviews and profiles where this actor's behavior, which would get anyone else labeled as a nightmare to work with, gets spun into evidence of his seriousness and commitment. And the worst part is that this framing has real consequences. It creates an environment where abusive behavior in pursuit of artistic excellence becomes not just tolerated but celebrated. It tells young actors that if they want to be taken seriously, they need to adopt similar approaches, need to be willing to sacrifice other people's well-being and livelihoods on the altar of their process. Elliott described it as a kind of artistic narcissism taken to its logical extreme, where the only thing that matters is the final performance, and every other human consideration, every other person's dignity and professional needs, becomes completely irrelevant in comparison. The fifth name Elliott revealed is perhaps the most controversial because this actor has positioned himself as a political activist, someone who uses his platform to speak out about injustice, someone who's constantly talking about making the world a better place. This is an actor whose social media is filled with calls for equity, for fairness, for treating all people with dignity and respect. But according to Elliott, this is another case of profound hypocrisy, where the public statements couldn't be further from the private behavior. Elliott described this actor as someone who's figured out that political activism is excellent branding, that aligning yourself with the right causes makes you essentially bulletproof to criticism while simultaneously opening up opportunities and keeping you relevant even when the quality of your work declines. But behind the activist image, this actor allegedly runs his business interests in ways that completely contradict everything he claims to stand for publicly. Elliott talked about this actor's production company, which supposedly champions diverse voices and marginalized stories, but according to people who've worked there, operates on a model of underpaying workers while the actor himself takes massive salaries and producer fees. We're talking about people of color and women being brought in to work on projects specifically about their community's experiences, being told how important these stories are and how they should feel honored to be involved, and then being paid a fraction of what white male producers would make on similar projects. When people have tried to negotiate for fair compensation, they've allegedly been told that they should be grateful for the opportunity, that this is about the work and the message, not about money, all while the actor himself profits massively from these productions. Elliott described hearing from multiple people who've been through this experience, who went in excited to work with someone they admired politically, only to discover that the activism was a brand rather than a genuine belief system. But what really earns this actor a spot on Elliott's list isn't just the hypocrisy, though that's bad enough. It's the way he allegedly uses accusations of political incorrectness as a weapon to silence criticism. According to Elliott, if anyone speaks out about their mistreatment, this actor's team immediately frames it as an attack from people who don't support his activism, who don't want to see positive change in Hollywood. They'll suggest that criticism is coming from conservative elements trying to tear down someone who's fighting for justice. It's a manipulation that takes real political struggles and weaponizes them for personal protection. Elliott said watching this happen, watching genuine issues of representation and equity get twisted into shields for exploitation, is one of the most cynical things he's witnessed in Hollywood. And the tragedy is that it works. People who might otherwise speak out about their experiences stay silent because they don't want to be framed as being against the causes this actor claims to represent. Other activists defend him without knowing the full story because they view criticism of him as criticism of the movement. He's created a perfect system where his political brand makes him essentially untouchable, while behind that brand he allegedly operates in ways that perpetuate exactly the kind of exploitation and inequality he publicly condemns. The sixth and final actor Elliott named might be the most disturbing of all because this person's evil, according to Elliott, isn't about temperamental outbursts or even calculated cruelty. It's about something more subtle and potentially more damaging to the industry as a whole. This is an actor who's achieved massive success, who's one of the biggest box office draws in the world, someone whose name on a project virtually guarantees financial success. And according to Elliott, this actor has used that commercial power to fundamentally corrupt the creative process in Hollywood. We're talking about someone who has so much leverage that he allegedly demands control over every aspect of productions he's involved with, not because he has the expertise or vision to justify that control, but simply because he can. He has script approval, director approval, co-star approval, final cut, control over marketing, and according to Elliott, he uses all of that power to ensure that every project becomes less about telling the best possible story and more about serving his brand and his ego. Elliott described this actor as someone who's turned filmmaking into a vanity project factory. Scripts get rewritten to make his character more heroic, more central, more impressive, regardless of whether those changes serve the story. Directors with genuine vision get overruled on creative decisions because the actor wants scenes that showcase him in particular ways. Other actors' roles get reduced because the actor doesn't want anyone threatening his position as the clear star of every project. Elliott talked about speaking with writers who've had their scripts butchered by this actor's demands, who've watched stories they cared deeply about get turned into generic vehicles designed to do nothing except make this actor look good. He's spoken with directors who've described the experience of working with this actor as being a highly paid employee rather than a creative partner, where their job is to execute his vision rather than bring their own artistry to the project. What makes this particularly evil in Elliott's view is the long-term impact on cinema as an art form. This actor's massive success, achieved largely through this model of complete control, has created a template that other actors try to replicate. It's contributed to an environment where movies are increasingly built around protecting and showcasing star brands rather than telling compelling stories. It's made studios more willing to give creative control to people based on their commercial value rather than their creative vision. Elliott described it as a kind of artistic poison that's slowly killing the industry from within, where the focus shifts from making good films to making films that serve powerful actors' interests. And because this actor is so successful financially, because his movies make hundreds of millions of dollars, the industry treats his approach as the model to follow rather than the problem to solve. Elliott said watching this play out over the years, seeing the kinds of films that get made and the kinds that don't because of these dynamics, has been heartbreaking for someone who genuinely loves cinema as an art form. Now, here's what's really important to understand about Elliott's revelations, and this is something he emphasized repeatedly. He's not doing this because he's bitter or washed up or looking for attention. Sam Elliott is still working regularly, still respected, still someone who could easily keep his head down and collect paychecks for another decade. He's doing this because he's reached a point in his life and career where he feels a responsibility to speak truth about an industry that's become increasingly comfortable with allowing evil to flourish as long as it's profitable. Elliott talked about how Hollywood has always had its dark side, has always had people who abused their power and treated others terribly. But according to him, something has shifted in recent years. The industry has become more corporatized, more focused on protecting investments and managing brands, and in that environment, accountability has become almost impossible. The actors he's named aren't anomalies or exceptions. They're examples of a broader system that prioritizes profit and power over basic human decency. Elliott also made clear that these 6 actors, as bad as their behavior allegedly is, are symptoms of larger problems rather than the problems themselves. The real evil in Hollywood, according to Elliott, is the system that enables and protects these actors. It's the studios that continue giving them work despite knowing about their behavior. It's the publicists and managers who help cover up or spin their actions. It's the other actors and industry professionals who stay silent because speaking out could damage their own careers. It's the media that often chooses to ignore or downplay stories about bad behavior when they involve powerful enough people. Elliott described Hollywood as operating like a medieval court, where the most powerful people are essentially untouchable, where there's one set of rules for the kings and queens and a completely different set for everyone else. And the tragedy is that so many people in the industry know this is how it works, hate that this is how it works, but feel powerless to change it because the stakes for their own careers are so high. Throughout his revelation, Elliott kept coming back to the impact on regular people trying to make it in Hollywood. He talked about the young actors who come to Los Angeles with dreams and talent, only to encounter these toxic personalities and have to choose between tolerating abuse and giving up their dreams. He talked about crew members who work incredibly hard at difficult jobs, who are passionate about filmmaking, but who get treated as completely disposable by actors who view them as servants rather than collaborators. He talked about writers and directors whose creative visions get destroyed by actors more concerned with their own image than with telling good stories. Elliott said the human cost of Hollywood's tolerance for evil behavior is incalculable, that for every success story you hear about, there are dozens or hundreds of people whose careers were damaged or destroyed by encounters with actors like the ones he's named. But Elliott also emphasized that he's not completely pessimistic about Hollywood's future. He believes that change is possible, that the industry can become better, but only if enough people are willing to speak honestly about its problems. He said that's part of why he decided to go public with these names and stories, even knowing it might cause controversy or backlash. He's hoping that by adding his voice, his credibility, his decades of experience to the conversation, he can help create space for others to speak out as well. Elliott talked about seeing encouraging signs in recent years, movements within the industry pushing for better treatment of workers, more accountability for powerful people, genuine efforts to change the culture. But he also said those efforts need support from established people like himself, people who have the security and status to speak without fear of immediate career destruction. One thing Elliott was very clear about is that he's not calling for these 6 actors to be erased or never work again. He's calling for accountability, for honest recognition of their behavior, for an end to the protection and enabling they've received. He believes people can change, believes that even those who've behaved badly can potentially grow and do better. But that growth can't happen as long as the industry keeps pretending the behavior doesn't exist or doesn't matter. Elliott said real change requires real consequences, requires these actors to face the impact of their actions rather than being shielded from it. It requires the industry to stop valuing profit and prestige so far above human decency that abuse becomes just another cost of doing business. Elliott also addressed the question of why he's speaking out now, after decades in the industry. He said part of it is simply reaching a stage in his life where legacy matters more than career considerations. He's in his 70s now, has had an incredible run, and is more concerned with what kind of industry he'll leave behind than with protecting his own position within it. But he also said recent events, both within Hollywood and in the broader culture, have made him feel like this is a moment where truth-telling might actually matter, where people might actually be ready to listen and demand change. He referenced various movements and reckonings that have happened in recent years, said they've created an environment where speaking out feels less futile than it might have a decade or two ago. The response to Elliott's revelations has been, predictably, mixed. Some people in Hollywood have praised his courage, have shared their own stories confirming what he's said, have expressed relief that someone with his stature is finally saying publicly what many have known privately for years. But there's also been pushback, with some defending the actors he's named, questioning his motives, suggesting he's exaggerating or misremembering events. The actors themselves, through their representatives, have largely denied Elliott's characterizations, calling them false or taken out of context. Several have suggested that Elliott is bitter about his own career or jealous of their success. It's the kind of response that Elliott apparently expected, and that he says proves his point about how Hollywood protects its own. What's particularly interesting is how the public response has split along predictable lines. Fans of the actors Elliott named have largely rushed to their defense, dismissing Elliott's claims as baseless gossip or attacks motivated by jealousy. Meanwhile, people who work in the industry, especially those in below-the-line positions, have overwhelmingly supported Elliott's claims, sharing their own stories and experiences that corroborate his broader points about how power operates in Hollywood. This split between public perception and industry reality is something Elliott specifically addressed, talking about how carefully these actors have cultivated their public images precisely so that they'd have fan support to fall back on if anyone ever challenged their private behavior. Elliott also talked about the role of social media in both exposing and protecting bad behavior in Hollywood. On one hand, platforms have made it harder to completely bury stories about actor misconduct, have given victims platforms to share their experiences, have created movements that have brought down even some very powerful people. But on the other hand, Elliott noted that social media has also made reputation management easier in some ways, has allowed bad actors to speak directly to their fans and frame any criticism as attacks or conspiracies, has created echo chambers where people only hear information that confirms what they already believe. He said navigating this landscape is complicated, but ultimately he believes truth has a way of emerging if enough people are committed to telling it. Looking at the broader implications of Elliott's revelations, what emerges is a picture of an industry at a crossroads. Hollywood has weathered various scandals and reckonings over the years, has made performative commitments to change while often maintaining the same underlying power structures. The question now is whether Elliott's decision to name names, to speak specifically rather than in generalities, will actually catalyze meaningful change or whether it will just be another moment that the industry weathers and moves past. Elliott himself seems uncertain about the answer, hopeful but realistic about how resistant to change Hollywood can be. One of the most powerful moments in Elliott's revelation came when he talked about the actors and industry professionals he's admired over his career, the people who've managed to achieve success while maintaining their integrity and treating people well. He said those people exist, that Hollywood isn't uniformly corrupt or evil, but that the good people often don't get celebrated or held up as models the way they should be. Instead, the industry tends to celebrate and reward exactly the kind of behavior that Elliott is speaking out against, treating ruthlessness and narcissism as evidence of dedication and artistic seriousness rather than as character flaws that should be addressed. Elliott said shifting that dynamic, getting the industry to actually value decency and integrity as much as it values profit and prestige, is essential for Hollywood's future. Elliott also addressed the question of whether speaking out makes him a hypocrite, whether he should have said something sooner, whether his decades of silence make him complicit in the behavior he's now condemning. He acknowledged the complexity of that question, said he's thought about it a lot, and doesn't claim to have been perfect in his own responses to witnessing bad behavior over the years. He's stayed silent at times when maybe he should have spoken up, has worked on projects with people whose behavior troubled him because that was the job available, has made compromises that in retrospect he wishes he hadn't made. But he said the alternative, continuing to stay silent because he hasn't been perfect, seems worse than speaking imperfectly now. He said change doesn't require perfection. It requires people being willing to do better going forward even if they didn't always do well in the past. The conversation about Elliott's revelations has also raised questions about power dynamics in Hollywood more broadly. If actors with this level of fame and success can behave this badly for this long with essentially no consequences, what does that say about the industry's actual values versus its stated values? Elliott pointed out that Hollywood loves to make movies about justice, about standing up to corruption, about ordinary people fighting against systems that protect the powerful. But when it comes to its own internal operations, the industry often operates exactly like the corrupt systems its movies criticize. There's one set of rules for people with enough power and profit potential, and a completely different set of rules for everyone else. Elliott said that contradiction between the stories Hollywood tells and the way Hollywood operates is something that's bothered him throughout his career. Another dimension Elliott explored was how gender plays into these dynamics. He noted that while his list of 6 actors happens to be all men, that's not coincidental. He said the kind of behavior he's describing is overwhelmingly perpetrated by men in positions of power, taking advantage of both men and women below them in the industry hierarchy but especially targeting women. Elliott talked about how Hollywood has always been a boys' club in many ways, how men have used their power to create environments where women have to tolerate inappropriate behavior as the price of pursuing their careers. He said while there are certainly women in Hollywood who've behaved badly and abused their power, the scale and systematic nature of men's abuse of power in the industry is different. And he said addressing that requires not just calling out individual bad actors but examining the masculine culture that treats dominance and control as natural expressions of success. Elliott's revelations have also sparked conversations about what accountability should actually look like. Is it enough for these actors to apologize if the stories are true? Should they face professional consequences? And if so, what kind? Should they be able to continue working in Hollywood? And if so, under what conditions? These are complicated questions without easy answers. Elliott himself said he's less interested in punishment than in genuine change, in these actors actually recognizing the harm they've caused and making real efforts to do better. But he also acknowledged that without some form of consequences, there's little incentive for change. If bad behavior is consistently rewarded or at least not punished, why would anyone modify how they operate? The role of audiences in all of this is another layer Elliott addressed. He said ultimately, the industry responds to what audiences support with their money and attention. If audiences continue flocking to movies starring actors who behave terribly, studios will continue casting those actors regardless of their behavior. But he also acknowledged that expecting audiences to thoroughly research the ethics of everyone involved in a movie before deciding whether to see it is unrealistic. Most people just want to enjoy a film, not conduct a moral audit of everyone who made it. Elliott said he doesn't have a perfect answer for how to balance appreciating art with holding artists accountable, but he thinks more information and transparency is generally better than less. Looking at the specific 6 actors Elliott named, patterns emerge that tell us something important about how success and power can corrupt. Several of these actors, according to Elliott, weren't always terrible to work with. They started their careers as relatively normal people, maybe a bit ambitious or intense, but not the nightmares they allegedly became. It was success, fame, and power that transformed them, that taught them they could get away with treating people badly, that surrounded them with people who would enable and protect them rather than challenge them. Elliott said watching that transformation happen to people he once respected has been one of the sadder aspects of his long career. It suggests that Hollywood's systems and culture have a corrupting influence, that even people who start with good intentions can become monsters if they're given enough power without enough accountability. Elliott also talked about the challenge of separating art from artist, a question that's become increasingly prominent in recent years. Can you enjoy a great performance from an actor who's terrible to the people around them? Should you? Is watching their movies and supporting their careers morally compromising? Or is it possible to appreciate their work while condemning their behavior? Elliott said he struggles with these questions himself, that he's given great performances in films alongside some of these actors he's now criticizing, and he doesn't know what the right answer is. He said he tends to think art has value independent of who creates it, that a powerful film can matter even if the people who made it behaved badly. But he also understands people who feel that supporting the work of someone who's caused real harm to real people is itself a form of harm. As Elliott's revelations continue to reverberate through Hollywood and beyond, they've opened up space for broader conversations about work culture, power, accountability, and change. People in industries beyond entertainment have started drawing parallels to their own experiences, recognizing similar dynamics in their workplaces. The tech industry, finance, politics, academia, anywhere there are significant power imbalances and valuable rewards for success, you find similar patterns of powerful people behaving badly and systems that protect them. Elliott's decision to speak specifically and name names has provided a template for how these conversations might be productive, how moving from generalities to specifics, while risky and controversial, can actually advance understanding and create pressure for change. One aspect of Elliott's approach that's worth noting is his refusal to make this about himself or his own victimhood. He's not claiming to have been personally victimized by these actors, though he's witnessed and been troubled by their behavior. He's using his platform and credibility to speak up for people who don't have the power or security to speak for themselves. That choice matters because it undercuts some of the common defenses against these kinds of revelations. It's harder to dismiss his claims as sour grapes or jealousy when he's not primarily talking about how he was wronged. It's harder to suggest he's just seeking attention when he's spent decades avoiding controversy and could easily coast on his reputation for the rest of his career. The question of what happens next remains open. Will Elliott's revelations actually lead to meaningful consequences for the actors he's named? Will it encourage more people to speak out about their own experiences? Will it catalyze broader changes in how Hollywood operates, or will it just be another scandal that the industry weathers and forgets? Elliott himself said he doesn't know the answers to these questions, but he felt he had to try, had to add his voice to pushing for change even if he can't control the outcome. He said silence definitely doesn't lead to change, so speaking out at least creates the possibility of something different. In the end, Sam Elliott's decision to reveal these 6 actors represents something larger than just gossip about bad behavior in Hollywood. It's a challenge to the industry's fundamental values and priorities, a demand for accountability in a system that's historically resisted it, and an invitation for broader conversations about how power should and shouldn't work in any creative field. Whether that challenge gets taken seriously, whether it leads to actual change, remains to be seen. But Elliott's willingness to put his reputation and relationships on the line to speak what he sees as truth is itself significant, a reminder that even in systems that seem immovable, individuals still have the power to speak out, to say this isn't right, to demand better. And sometimes, that's how change begins, not with perfect solutions or guaranteed outcomes, but with someone respected enough and brave enough to say what others have only whispered.